Welcome everyone, Costin here with a discussion about Total War Warhammer 3 Immortal Empires and about Legend of Total War's petition on change.org to make Immortal Empires available to everyone that owns Warhammer 3 without requiring Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2. Now, this petition, which has reached over 17,000 signatures by the moment of recording, likely will reach over 18,000 soon enough. This petition is important in addressing one of the big issues that Total War Warhammer does have right now. Now, Legend says this: Immortal Empires is the quintessential experience of the trilogy and currently requires the purchase of 1, 2, and 3 in order to have access to it. Any DLC for Associated Lords also has to be purchased. This is not a problem for those of us that have been with the trilogy since the start, but to people looking to get into this game, a very hefty paywall is created, and to some, the barrier to entry is far too high. And also, he talks about the issues that the baseline campaign of Warhammer 3 has. Realms of Chaos is not particularly great. It's universally despised, and he goes into some greater detail. But what he proposes is for Immortal Empires to be accessible and allow players that only purchase Warhammer 3 to have access to it, but lock out the Lords from Game 1 and 2 until purchased. Even with only the Game 3 Lords available, the Immortal Empires experience is vastly better than what is currently on offer with the Realms of Chaos. Now, how do I feel about this petition? Well, I agree. Fundamentally, I agree with his perspective. Realms of Chaos is bad, and I'll go into the details of why it's so bad in just a bit. But suffice it to say, it's not a great experience. Immortal Empires is far better, just like Mortal Empires in Warhammer 2 was considered far better than the Vortex campaign. But here's the thing. The Vortex campaign was at least playable to a pretty decent degree. Realms of Chaos is just dull, boring, and forgettable. And so people that are just buying Warhammer 3, they're not getting a great experience. Now, why Legend is doing this is because he, like many other YouTubers and streamers, he's noticed a massive player drop-off. And we can see this reflected in the Steam statistics. So this petition really at its heart is to lower the barrier of entry and get more people into playing Warhammer 3. Now, do I think it's good enough? Well, it would help solve some of the issues, but here's the big problem that would exist even if Creative Assembly were to do this. And I'll be blunt, I think it's unlikely that they will. I mean, we're talking here of a company that has kept the price of the baseline Beastman DLC and other DLCs the same on Steam, minus some discounts that exist, of course, seasonal discounts. We're talking of a company that still asks on Steam to pay for you to pay $60 or 60 euros to buy Warhammer 1 and 2 outside of, again, seasonal discounts. Now, yes, you can buy those games for much lower from certain websites, true, but I think that the way they keep the prices on Steam is reflective of not just Creative Assembly's culture, so to speak, or their business strategy, but Sega's business strategy, because we can complain about Creative Assembly all we want, but ultimately it's not they who make these kind of major decisions, really. Sega has, at least when it comes to pricing, I imagine, they likely have a significant amount of influence. That would just be my personal guess on the subject. I have no insider information to be clear on this, but if I were to suspect anything, I think that Sega is very much involved in the pricing model and all that. So, would giving access to Immortal Empires be a good thing? Yes, and it would help the player base, but there's still many other issues that Warhammer 3 and Immortal Empires do have. Now, first off, the biggest issue that would exist would be the fact that the Warhammer 3 races that currently exist, right, be it Kislev, Cathay, Demons of Chaos, and Ogres, are pretty fucking shit. Especially for Immortal Empires. They're not great. None of them are particularly great. The best of all of them is Cathay, and Cathay has a mountain of problems in its own right. Let's not ignore that. It's not like Cathay is a top-tier race. It's not the top-tier race. It's not the best campaign. It's frustrating as well having to constantly manage the ping-pong of yin and yang. but it's at least the most playable and scalable race for Immortal Empires. Okay, if you allow people to play Immortal Empires and they only own game free, all they're going to get to experience with that is just bad races, bad factions. Now, yes, people say, oh, Scarbrand is a good race, all that. Personally, I enjoy playing Kislev far more than, I complain about the reality, but, I mean, the issues are there. The issues are there. It's just for my particular playstyle, I prefer Kislev because of their huge amount of casualty replenishment to the Patriarchs, which allows me to avoid fighting a bunch of pointless sensical battles because I can easily recover from them, even though I take massive casualties. But all the same, Kislev is in a bad spot, Demons of Chaos are in a bad spot, Ogres are in a bad spot. All of the races that currently exist in Warhammer 3, with the exception of Cathay, tend to do far worse than races from either Game 1 or Game 2. So here would be my perspective on what Creative Assembly should do if they were to do it. Now, even if they only allowed the Warhammer 3 races, let me be clear on this, it still would be something that would help with player retention, because that's a major issue, but it's only part of the problem. One of the things I do believe would help significantly with getting a lot more people into it is if they also gave people access to some, not all, but some of the legendary lords from the previous games. It wouldn't have to be a lot. Let's just say you would get access, like for Game 2, you would just get access to Tyrion. From Game 1, either Vlad, Isabella, which by the way were free DLC lords in Warhammer 1, either Vlad, Isabella, or hell, even Manfred, take Manfred, or Grimgor, or Azag. If you would get some of those races available in Warhammer 3 for free, not the entirety of the Empire, not, of course, the entirety of the races in Warhammer 1 and Warhammer 2, but if we were to get those kind of lords available to everyone, just if they own Warhammer 3, if they could play them in Immortal Empires, I think that would improve the situation when it comes to player retention. That's my perspective. So giving a number of DLC lords to be available even if you don't own Game 1 and Game 2, I think would be ideal. Especially if it's, lords like Grimgor, Azag, Vlad, Isabella, or Tyrion, or even Malekith, really, for all the issues Malekith has in his campaign. I think giving a bunch of legendary lords that are actually good to play and enjoyable to play, of races that are enjoyable to play, would go a long way towards bringing new players in and getting those players to buy Warhammer 1, Warhammer 2. By the way, you can buy them for far less than $60. Let's be clear on that. But of course, the barrier of entry is pretty high, and that's just the baseline game. That's not including any of the DLC packs. Some of those DLC packs are pretty essential for some of those races. Let's talk about the issues of Realms of Chaos and how Creative Assembly completely messed it up with regards to this version of the game. So this is a campaign on turn 1 as Miao Ying, and let's discuss the problems that exist in Realms of Chaos. The first one is, of course, the Realms of Chaos itself. To win the campaign, you have two choices. You either kill a bunch of factions. In this case of Miao Ying, you have to basically take out Kislev, all the Chaos factions, Goldtooth, and Ogres. Basically, all the other major factions. That would be a fairly substantial effort, because you would have to go from the far eastern side of the map to the far western side to deal with Scrag, who is right over here. And you would basically have to paint the entire map in your colors in order to win a domination campaign victory. So your alternative is the Forge of Souls campaign. Now the problem with the Forge of Souls, and there's a lot of issues with that, is that the Forge of Souls mechanic is very, very boring to deal with. If you can win the campaign by just doing the Forge of Souls, and you can absolutely, and get some significant campaign bonuses for doing that, either Be'lakor or banishing Be'lakor and getting some campaign bonuses, then you're playing a much more limited campaign. Which means, like, let's say in Miao Ying, all you need to do is get all of Cathay, this limited portion of the map, and you don't have to care about anything else around the map. And you wouldn't want to care about the rest of the map, because a lot of terrain around the map as Cathay is not suitable terrain for you. The only suitable part of terrain is actually found in the Empire, which is far to the west. So By design, due to the terrain types, if you're playing a Cafe faction, and you're looking to do the Forge of Souls, you will limit yourself to just engaging in Cafe and engaging with the Realms of Chaos. Now, the Realms of Chaos suck, and the reason they suck is the battles themselves in there are very easy, and yet it still takes you 10 turns to go through the entire thing. Or let's say it takes you less, you can do it certainly faster, but it's still a tedious slog that isn't fun at all. Thankfully, you can auto-resolve the meaningless survival battles over there, but it's not a great experience. In the final battle, those kind of survival battles are not exactly fun at all. But the issue with survival battles actually touches on a bigger issue that Warhammer 3, and I'd say Total War has had for a while, in that the battles are not necessarily good, but I'll get to that in just a bit. So that's one way. And again, it becomes boring, because once you deal with your initial enemies, you're just waiting turn after turn after turn for the rifts to appear so you can go into the Realms of Chaos. But let's say you want to paint the entire campaign map. Let's say you go with that. Well, one of the things you realize, it's outside of the major factions, like Azazel, the Warriors of Chaos, the Champions of Chaos, the various demonic factions, Goldtooth, all that. There's a bunch of minor factions that are very, very weak. In particular, the Empire is pathetically weak in Realms of Chaos. Like, the Empire, if you can get there, is basically free territory for you to swallow. As any faction, Kislev, Cafe, doesn't matter. Because all of these factions are just very weak and insignificant. What that means really, though, is that a large portion of the map, be it the Darklands or the Empire, and even in the far north, a lot of the map is actually populated by insignificant factions that are very easy to kill, very easy to deal with. The major factions are no joke, let's be clear on that, but the minor factions are insignificant. And look at the Empire. The only factions that threaten the Empire are Festus all the way here, and of course Scrag. That's it. There's a lot of dead space, so to speak, in the Realms of Chaos campaign, which makes dealing with this campaign and this campaign map far less interesting than Immortal Empires. I mean, Immortal Empires is chock full of major factions, but even beyond that, even the minor factions, at least early on, feel like they're more significant. Like, early on, the minor factions can be significant, but once you reach a certain point in your campaign, you'll just be smashing them with complete ease. And that's not necessarily something I can say about Immortal Empires, though of course the major factions are going to dominate the map there. And there's less dead zones. I'd say that is a fairly crucial aspect of Immortal Empires compared to Realms of Chaos. And the realm rifts themselves spawning demons actually hurts these minor factions far more. Without the rifts, maybe these minor factions would be more significant, but here's what happens. You get to a certain point in your campaign. You have a way of closing the rifts. The AI just waits for the demons to spawn, and you get significant demonic armies spawning across the entire map, weakening all factions, all AI factions, by a fair amount. The major factions deal with it, the minor factions lose a lot, which means they become even less relevant than they were before. That's why Realms of Chaos sucks. The objective sucks, the map sucks, a lot of it is dead zones, a lot of it is not interesting, and it's not fun to play Realms of Chaos. It's very boring. Like, even playing Kislev and Immortal Empires, for all their issues they have, is far more interesting than playing Kislev in Realms of Chaos. You might get farther ahead in the campaign in Realms of Chaos, but it's a lot more dull. And mind you, Kislev is at least in a good spot because they can take over the mountains, whereas Cafe is actually in a really bad spot because they can't take over the mountains. They only have very limited terrain types that they can settle in. So Cafe, which is actually one of the better factions of Warhammer 3, is very limited by the terrain situation that they get in their campaign. Alright, so with that said and done, let's talk about the situation that Warhammer 3 faces in general. The player-based retention has certainly dropped off a cliff, but here's the thing. Making Immortal Empires available to more people, far cheaper, far more easier, it would help, but it wouldn't solve some of the bigger issues. Because if we look at the statistics that Warhammer 3 had when Immortal Empires came out, it was one of the most popular games on Steam, top 10, one of the top 10 games on Steam in terms of concurrent players, and then it dropped off a cliff. And while, yes, the barrier entry is high, so that creates issues with getting new players, there are problems beyond that. Because there's clearly a large player base, a very large player base that does own these games, that has played Immortal Empires, and they didn't like it. Now, you can point to other games coming out, Call of Duty, Darktide, World of Warcraft, etc., Overwatch, but I don't think that's really it. I think the reality is that, in a lot of ways, Immortal Empires, and in general Total War, has some very significant issues with their current formula. The campaign is okay in a lot of ways, though it could be considered simplistic compared to some other grand strategy games, but it's okay, it gets the job done. It's actually a joy to play a campaign and just deal with the campaign map. Like, one of the things I've personally been doing as of late, when I'm just enjoying a campaign in my own time, is I just set the battle difficulty to easy so I can resolve every battle. But there comes the problem, the battles. This is where a lot of people might disagree with me, but my genuine opinion is that the vast majority of battles in Total War are pretty crap. And the reason they're crap, beyond the way the mechanics are, beyond the lack of strategy, beyond the stupidity of the AI, beyond the cheesy tactics that are the best way to play, beyond many of those issues, beyond the fact that for a strategy game, the battles are pathetically simple in terms of their tactics and strategy, and you don't feel real joy from dealing with the challenge. Beyond that, those kind of challenges, those kind of battles that are actually important are very rare. The vast majority of battles in a campaign are insignificant battles, especially later on, but even early on. The vast majority of battles are settlement battles, and the vast majority of battles are either against garrisons or weak armies, where you win in like 1-2 minutes, you're not really involved. Even if the battle lasts longer, a siege may last quite a bit longer, but it's not like I'm being engaged in a siege. Like, if I'm playing a faction with ranged units, all I do is park those ranged units outside the walls, make sure that I deal with the towers or find the dead zone where the towers can target me, kill everything inside. Even if I don't succeed on the first go, I just back down, back off, come back again in the same turn if I have enough movement, attack again, win the battle. It isn't an engaging experience, regardless of what people might say. And this does matter. If a lot of the battles in a campaign are boring pieces of crap, then people are going to be put off. And I think that's one of the main reasons, one of the big reasons why, despite so many people picking up the game, so many people quit. Because when you're playing a campaign and let's say 90% of your battles are boring, pointless pieces of crap, or you have to go through minutes and minutes of loading screens on your way in, on your way out, and you know you're going into a battle that you're going to win while you're sleeping, if you're a veteran player of the series, that's not a game you want to enjoy. And if I had to do this constantly, I would not be playing Warhammer 3 right now. Now, thankfully, there is a way to do it, but it kind of feels that it cheapens the experience because you're just removing a significant portion of the game. But as I've said before, I've had a lot more fun just essentially being able to out-resolve in all the battles in the campaign by setting the battle difficulty to easy. No joke. The auto-resolve is too painful. And another problem with the situation with the auto-resolve is it's very painful, but it's painful in the wrong situations as well. What do I mean by that? Well, if you attack any settlement, or if you're attacking even an army that you know that when you go into a manual battle, even on the highest difficulty, you're going to smash to pieces, and you're taking a lot of damage, then that's not a good auto-resolve system. And that's one of the big problems. We can't just, auto-resolve our way through it. By the way, in some previous Total War games, we could, like in Shogun 2, to my great surprise. If you attack a pathetic garrison, you're taking minimal casualties. If you attack a garrison in Warhammer 3, for whatever reason, it feels like you're smashing your head against a brick wall, or your units are literally killing themselves against a brick wall, when if you fight the battle manually, you win it with ease, with significant ease. But there's more to it, to this issue, than just that. That's one problem. That that we have to fight a lot of pointless battles manually because the auto resolve is not that great. But even then, that's only part of the problem. In a campaign that I've been doing as Boris Ursus, I got involved in a bit of a chase with Sigvald and Valkia. I was playing with a mod that gives other factions defeat the legendary lords, so basically Sigvald got Valkia when she died. So I was being chased, or rather Sigvald and Valkia were moving from my territory. And I thought to myself, wow, this is going to be a great battle, right? So I move two of my main armies, two of my most powerful armies, including the one I had with Boris Ursus, to confront them. And I was, a bit skeptical about my chances, because Valkia and Sigvald are pretty scary. But then when I get to the battle, they run away. They literally won't fight me. Then I realized that my armies are far more significant. And even a single one of those armies could auto-resolve both of them. And here's the problem. Of course you do. Like, this is something that happens a lot in my campaigns. Like, I want to fight a lot of these pointless, meaningless battles because my army obviously is going to take significant damage otherwise. And because I can take very few casualties by doing them manually. But when you're going up against something like Valkia, Sigvald, you're going to take a decent number of casualties. And so that's the only situation in which the auto-resolve is kind of correct when it comes to your odds. So why go for the grinder? Like, like you're incentivized. Like, this is important. The incentive structure at the moment, if you're playing on any difficulty, except easy battle difficulty, the incentive structure is fight a bunch of the pointless garrison battles manually to significantly reduce your casualties or even lower them to zero, but don't fight the major battles manually if you can avoid them. Like, if you're going up against a powerful enemy doomstack, why risk losing that battle by fighting it manually when you can get into a situation in your campaign to just be able to out-resolve it on the highest possible difficulty of the game? And that's actually what I do, and it's a campaign plan. It works pretty well. Draika, for instance, is a perfect example of this. If you can avoid fighting Draika manually, that's a great situation, because her army is an absolute nightmare to fight manually. So what do? Do you fight her manually? No, you bring two armies as Azag, as Kislev, whatever, or you catch her out of position and you wipe her out with auto-resolve and avoid having to face the stress of facing her in battle. But the problem is that this creates an incentive where we're doing everything we can as players to avoid the actually interesting battles, because we might lose them manually. And so we even our odds, we bring two free armies to auto-resolve them. Of course, you can't do this with the endgame crisis, though you can abuse ambush stances and all that. In fact, people have done this. Like, this is one strategy. You use ambush stance to lure an enemy into a position where they're not prepared, and that's how you win against, let's say, a more powerful faction, because they're not going to send two armies into an ambush like that. They're going to send one army. And you're going to ambush one army. Might be powerful, sure, but you're ambushing them. You get better odds with that. So there's quite a few problems with the incentive structure of battles. The auto-resolve is so utterly broken. It doesn't consider proper unit strengths in any real way. Like an army of Treekin, for instance, or Draika's army devastates armies far more numerous than hers if you fight them manually, but it's not reflected properly in auto-resolve. Or abilities like Ikiclaw's nukes are not reflected properly. The actual situation that you face in sieges is not reflected properly. And I can go on, but the essential point is the battles suck in many ways. They suck in auto-resolve, they suck in the tactics that currently happen, and they also suck because of the power creep. The vast majority of battles that will be fought on a campaign map, your strategy or tactics don't really matter, because most of the time, unless you're using significant cheeses, of course, but many times I find that the outcome of battle is predetermined. So why would I fight that battle anyway? To reduce casualties? That's why you're doing it. because of all the unit experience ranks and the power creep that exists on lords and legendary lords, with their skill lines significantly improving their units, which this is not something that couldn't be avoided, because we've actually had Total War games in the past where, yes, generals added, a high-level general would add power to an army, like, let's remember the Dread mechanic in Medieval 2, of course, but we've also had Total War games where, while a general was significant, it wasn't like a night and day difference between an army with such a general and an army without such a general. It still mattered, don't get me wrong, it would give you an edge, but it's not like, oh, your army is twice as good or 3 times as good as it was before. And I think that's one key difference that Creative Assembly has made between previous Total Wars, some previous Total Wars, and Total War Warhammer in general. So that's where I stand on this. Now, some people think, oh, auto-resolve is too beneficial to the player, and I'm like, no, it's not too beneficial to the player. In some situations, sure, when you bring 3 armies with high armor and you defeat one, sure, you could argue that, I suppose. But most of the time, it's very punishing, and it's punishing in the worst possible ways. It would be better if it was more punishing when you were facing an actual doom stack of enemies, and less punishing when you're facing a pathetic garrison. That would be a better situation. Because for all the petitions, for all the accessibility of players, as long as this kind of situation remains the same, I think that the player-based retention is going to be a problem in Total War going forward. That's where I stand on this. I mean, there are games that have Total War style battles that are far more enjoyable, even when you know, like, this is the crucial aspect, they're not enjoyable when you're steamrolling it, but there's games that where it is enjoyable even when you're steamrolling it. Like a great game that I can give an example of is Ultimate General Civil War. Because there, if you play your cards right, if you use strategy, you will smash the enemy, but you actually have to dedicate yourself in each and every battle. You don't auto-resolve battles, you fight every single minor and major battle. Some battles are cakewalk that you do have, but all of them are interesting, even the ones that are cakewalk, because they're not a cakewalk because you just sent your line forward towards the enemy and just shot them to pieces. You actually have to do proper positioning, move your artillery forward where you're obviously risking, be ready to roll up their flanks with cavalry, all that, try and surround them, try and capture as many of them as possible, all that kind of stuff. Whereas in a lot of Total War battles, those kind of battles just feel meaningless and pointless. Especially the many sieges that we currently have in the game. Costin here signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications. And look, for all the things that I've said, I've touched on the issues that as I view them in Total War. But for all those things that I have stated here, I do believe that the petition is a good thing, but I think that there are bigger issues as well that need to be tackled with regards to Total War Warhammer before the player base retention will be improved. But again, the petition would be a good thing if it was something that Creative Assembly would actually do. So stay tuned for more, everyone.